Good morning, students. Our session of corporate finance. As far as our previous session was concerned, in that we already discussed about the types of working capital. Now, in today's session, we will discuss about factors determining working capital. Here we are going to see that those components, those factors who directly affect the requirement of working capital in any organization. So there are numbers of factors and we are going to discuss one by one. The first one is nature of business. Yes, the need for working capital, or we can say that the requirement of working capital is totally depends upon the business in which you are involved. So nature of business is one of the major factor that will show or that will give the requirement of working capital. Second one is production cycle. If you are manufacturing a normal product or a regular product, then your production cycle will be continue. But if your business is engaged in the process of seasonable goods, at that time there is a gap in your production cycle. So as per your production, you are going to select the level of working capital in your business. Some of the product that are going to pass from more than 2 to 3 process. So at that time the requirement for working capital is really very high. And if the production cycle is very small, so for that the requirement for working capital is quite low. As it already stated that longer the production cycle, more will be the need for working capital. And if the production cycle is small, then definitely the requirement for working capital is very low. Then after, business cycle. Now here we are going to analyze the stage in which your business is about. If your business in the introduction stage, so the requirement of working capital is totally different from the another stage. As we already know that there are 4 different business or there are 4 different stages in the business cycle. The introduction stage is there, then after the growth stage is there, the maturity level is there, and last one, that is decline. Now here the business is going to analyze itself that in which stage the business is, and as per that stage, as per that level, the company is going to raise the requirement for working capital. Then after, the next one is production policy. Yes, here the production policy is totally depends upon the types of product that the company is producing. If the demand of that particular product is very high, then definitely the production policy is going to be continued. Sometimes the working capital need will be low when the demand is high, because the cash flow, the cash inflow and outflow that is going to continue in the business. Basically, production policy has a direct relationship with the technology that we are using at the time of production. If the organization is totally based upon the capital intensive technology, then definitely the requirement for working capital is very high, because we need to pay a proper amount on repairs and maintenance, then the repayment of installments, then after we required the funds for payment of interest. So if the capital intensive technology is there, at that time the requirement for working capital is very high. And if the company is doing their production on the basis of labor intensive technology, then definitely the requirement is quite low as compared to capital intensive technology, because in labor intensive technology we are going to pay for wages only. Here the another expenditures are not there in the labor intensive technology. Then after, the next one is credit policy. If the credit policy is very strict, if the company adopts the credit policy on the advanced level, and if the cash inflow is going to match with the cash outflow, then definitely the requirement for working capital is moderate. But if the company adopt a very liberal credit policy, at that time it is possible that your debtors are not going to pay on time. And if cash inflow that does not match with the cash outflow, then definitely the requirement for working capital is very high. So it is totally depends upon the credit policy which the organization is going to adopt. Then after, the next point is growth and expansion. Yes, if the firm is growing, if the firm is expanding itself, then definitely the need for working capital is also increasing. If the firm is declining, then definitely the requirement for working capital will come down. So there is a direct relationship between the growth and the requirement for working capital. The next point, that is availability of raw material. Yes, definitely, if the raw material is easily available, then we are not supposed to think about the requirement for working capital, because the purchase of raw material is going to be managed very easily. But if there is a shortage of raw material in the market, then definitely we are going to manage a huge provision for the raw material. For the working capital. So, it is totally depends upon the types of raw material in which your production is engaged. If you are using a regular raw material, then it is easily available in the market. But if we are using such a rare raw material, then definitely we need to make a strong provision for working capital. Then after, the next point is profit margin. As we already know that the profit is one of the major source of working capital, because out of the profit we are making the retained earning, and out of this retained earning we are going to manage a requirement of working capital. Yes, if the profit margin, that is totally depends upon the calculation of selling price. So if the profit margin is high, at that time the organization required more working capital. And definitely if the profit margin on sales price is low, then definitely the requirement for working capital will be low. The next one is size of business. If the volume or the size of business is large, then definitely the requirement of working capital will be high. And vice versa, if the volume of business is small or medium, then definitely the requirement for it will be low or medium. So there is a direct relationship with the size of business. Then after, the cash profit. If the cash profit is high as compared to the credit profit, or we can say that if the cash sale is there, then the company is not going to make a huge provision on working capital, because company is able to maintain its source of finance of working capital out of this cash profit. But if the credit policy is that if the company sells most of the product through the credit, then definitely the requirement will be very high for the working capital. Then after, level of tax. If the rate of taxation is high, And if the company is paying advance tax to the government, then definitely the working capital needs may be influenced by paying high tax. So definitely, if the taxation policy of the government is strict, then definitely the requirement for working capital will be high. Then after, the next one is depreciation policy. Yes, as we already know that the depreciation is our non-cash expenditures. If the company adopt the liberal depreciation policy, then they are going to have a conservative depreciation policy, so that the requirement for working capital will be less. In liberal depreciation policy, the requirement for working capital is high, because in liberal depreciation policy there is no proper format for it. So it is totally depends upon the types of assets in which the company is going to allocate the depreciation in that. The next point is dividend policy. If a company paying maximum dividend to their shareholders, so at that time the requirement for working capital will be less. And if the company paying limited dividend to their shareholders, so for that reason the availability of working capital is very high. The next one is price level change. If the price of the products are increasing, then definitely company is going to manage more working capital to cope up with the particular situation. And if the price of the products are stable, then definitely the requirement of working capital will decline. And the last one is attitude of risk. Definitely it is totally depends upon the nature of the management. If the company is if the nature of the company's management is risk taker, if they are the risk taker, then definitely they are putting a less emphasis on requirement for working capital. And if the managements, if they are risk seeker, then definitely they are going to make a more provision for the requirement of working capital. So here we'll discuss about the factors determining working capital. Out of this point, we are going to explain any 10 points. You are not going to remember the whole stuff. And now the last point, the very easy point, that is components of working capital. Now these are the components from which you are going to satisfy your requirement or your need of working capital. Now in that, the first one is cash in hand, then after cash at bank, then after marketable securities. Now here marketable securities are those securities which can be easily converted into cash. You can easily sell off the security in the market, and that security is going to convert in cash. Then after receivables, that is our debtors. The fifth one is inventories, the stock. And last one, that is deposits and advance. The company's deposits, the company's advance payment. So these are the components of working capital. I hope you all are clear about this point. The factors and components of working capital is clear to you. So that's all for today. Thank you, students. Thank you so much.